The last of the evacuation shuttles staggered into Kepler 442b's atmosphere, trailing smoke and debris. Commander Wrath of the Zephyrian Starguard watched from the command center of New Zealand as the craft lurched toward the landing pad, its stabilizers clearly damaged. On the view screen, black-red tendrils of Vex bioform were visible, clinging to the shuttle's hull like parasitic vines. Emergency crews in hazard suits rushed forward with cutting tools even before the shuttle touched down. "How many aboard?" Wrath asked, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. Nix, his communications officer, glanced up from her console. Her feathered crest, normally a vibrant blue, had dulled to an ashen gray from weeks of exhaustion. 312 civilians from the Meridian colony. That's all of them, sir. All that survived, corrected Dex. Wrath's tactical officer. The young Zephyrian's voice was bitter. He manipulated the holographic display, revealing real-time footage of the Meridian colony, or what remained of it. The settlement, once home to over 20,000, was now a writhing mass of Vex bioform. The black-red tendrils had consumed everything. Buildings, vehicles, infrastructure. Even from orbit, the cameras could detect movement as the Vex continued to absorb and process organic and inorganic material alike, converting it into more of their endless swarm. Wrath forced himself to watch. This was his responsibility. Each colony that fell, each life lost, the weight of it all rested on his shoulders. When the Vex had first appeared 3 months ago, breaching through what scientists only described as a tear in space-time, the Zephyrian Starguard had been woefully unprepared. Their civilization had known peace for generations. Their ships were primarily for exploration and trade. Their weapons were defensive, designed to discourage pirates or handle the occasional dangerous wildlife on new worlds. Nothing could have prepared them for the Vex. "Update on planetary evacuation," Wrath commanded, turning away from the horror of Meridian. Nix's fingers danced across her console. "We've evacuated approximately 800,000 civilians. The Newsiality hub is at capacity with 1.2 million. Remaining outposts report approximately another 800,000 still awaiting transport. And our fleet capacity?" Wrath already knew the answer, but he needed to hear it. Dex's crest flattened against his skull. "At current capacity and with remaining functional vessels, we can evacuate another 300,000, maybe." The unspoken truth hung in the air like a miasma. Over 1 million Zephyrians would be left behind to face the Vex, left to be consumed, converted, eradicated. "The Galactic Council?" Wrath asked, grasping at the thinnest thread of hope. Nix shook her head. "Still deliberating, sir. Their nearest humanitarian fleet is 6 weeks out, minimum. The Vex will have consumed the entire planet by then." Wrath closed his eyes. The Zephyrians had joined the Galactic Council a mere 30 years ago, one of the younger spacefaring civilizations. They had always been seen as something of an oddity, a species that had developed interstellar travel without first developing weapons of mass destruction. Their technology focused on sustainability, cooperation, and harmony with their environment. Their defensive capabilities were an afterthought, designed primarily to protect against natural disasters or the occasional pirate raid. The Vex had exploited this pacifism with ruthless efficiency. "Commander!" Nix's voice cut through Wrath's thoughts, her crest suddenly flushing with color. "I'm detecting a massive surge in FTL signatures at the system's edge." Wrath snapped to attention. "Council relief ships?" "Negative." Nix's voice trembled. These aren't Council signatures. I've never seen this configuration before." The main view screen shifted to show the outer reaches of the Kepler 442b system. Bright flashes of light bloomed against the darkness of space as dozens, then hundreds of vessels tore through the fabric of reality, emerging from faster-than-light travel in a carefully choreographed sequence. The vessels were unlike anything Wrath had ever seen. Angular, predatory, bristling with what could only be weapon systems. Are those Terran ships?" Dex whispered, his voice a mixture of awe and fear. "Earth, the rogue planet, the civilization that had declined membership in the Galactic Council, the warlike species that had developed nuclear weapons before achieving spaceflight, the culture that had nearly destroyed itself countless times, yet somehow survived and thrived. The species that the Council maintained strict trade embargoes against due to their refusal to disarm. The humans. Incoming transmission, Nyx announced, her voice steadier now. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, in galactic standard. Put it through, Wrath ordered. The view screen flickered, and a human face appeared. The being was obviously Terran, hairless except for the top of the head and above the eyes, skin a pale tan. Facial features flat compared to a Zephyrian's. The human wore a dark uniform adorned with insignia that Wrath didn't recognize. This is Admiral Helena Kane of the Terran Unified Defense Fleet. The human stated, voice clear and authoritative. We have received your distress signal and have come to render assistance. Please provide status of the Vex incursion and civilian population immediately. For a moment, Wrath was too stunned to respond. How had the humans even received their distress call? The Galactic Council maintained strict communication blackouts with Earth. This is Commander Wrath of the Zephyrian Star Guard. He finally managed. The Vex have consumed approximately 60% of our planet's surface. We have evacuated 800,000 civilians, with 1.2 million sheltered in our capital city of New Zealand. Approximately 800,000 remain in isolated colonies. Our evacuation capacity is insufficient. Admiral Kane's expression didn't change. Understood. We are dispatching reconnaissance drones to assess the situation. Please transmit all data you have on Vex positions, movement patterns, and biological analysis. The first wave of our ground forces will begin landing in New Zealand within the hour to establish a secure perimeter. Evacuation ships will follow. Wrath felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by confusion. Ground forces, Admiral, the Vex are... We are well aware of what the Vex are, Commander. Kane interrupted. We've studied the fragmentary reports that have made their way to our intelligence services. Rest assured, we have not come unprepared. The transmission cut off before Wrath could respond. Dex turned to him, eyes wide. Commander, those aren't relief ships. That's a war fleet. Wrath studied the data now flooding their systems. The Terran fleet was indeed like nothing in the Galactic Council's arsenal, where council vessels were smooth, elegant creations designed to fulfill multiple purposes. These human ships were purpose-built engines of destruction. The largest, a behemoth designated Hammer of Sol, according to the transmitted data, was nearly 3 kilometers in length. Sir, Nyx said quietly, the lead Terran vessels are engaging the Vex orbital structures. The view screen shifted again, showing the outer reaches of Kepler-442b's atmosphere. Over the past weeks, the Vex had constructed massive, organic space stations, processing nodes that coordinated their ground forces and served as hubs for their continued expansion. The Zephyrian fleet had tried and failed to destroy these structures, losing precious ships in the process. The humans, it seemed, had other ideas. The first salvo came from vessels designated as Artemis-class destroyers. Missiles streaked from their launch tubes, thousands of them, creating a dazzling light show against the backdrop of space. Wrath watched in disbelief as the missiles approached the nearest Vex node and then detonated in a synchronized nuclear barrage. Those are planet killers, Dex whispered. Nuclear warheads. The Council banned those centuries ago. The nuclear fire washed over the Vex structure. When the blinding light faded, the node was still there, damaged but intact. Its outer layers burning away to reveal the dense biological core beneath. Then came the second wave. Larger vessels, designated Thor-class battle cruisers, moved into position. Energy signatures spiked across Wrath's instruments as massive particle cannons charged and fired, sending lances of blue-white energy through the weakened sections of the Vex node. The structure began to break apart, pieces of it spinning away into the void. But it was the third wave that left Wrath truly speechless. Smaller, faster ships, Valkyrie-class interceptors, swarmed the damaged node like insects, firing precision weapons at specific points. Within minutes, the entire Vex structure collapsed in on itself, disintegrating completely. And that was just one node. Across Kepler 442b's orbit, the scene repeated itself a dozen times over. The Terran fleet moved with precision and coordination that spoke of extensive combat experience. Sir, Nix's voice was barely audible. The first Terran dropships are requesting landing clearance in New Zealand. Wrath tore his eyes away from the orbital battle. Grant it, and prepare to receive Admiral Kane. I believe we have much to discuss. The Terran dropships were as functional and intimidating as their capital ships. Blocky, armored craft descended through the atmosphere in tight formation. Their hulls painted a matte black with bright red markings that Wrath would later learn signified their combat division. They landed with precision in the designated areas of New Zealand spaceport, their engines barely cooling before ramps descended and human soldiers began to emerge. Wrath had seen images of humans before, in cultural exchange briefings and educational materials. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of Terran soldiers in full combat gear. Each human was encased in powered armor that increased their height by at least 30 centimeters. The suits were a dull gray, with various insignia and markings indicating rank and unit. Each soldier carried weapons that seemed oversized even for their augmented frames. Rifles, shoulder-mounted launchers, and various devices Wrath couldn't identify. Admiral Kane descended from the lead dropship, accompanied by a tall, heavily armored figure that Wrath assumed was a high-ranking ground commander. Unlike her soldiers, Kane wore only a simple uniform, though Wrath noted she carried a sidearm at her hip, something no Zephyrian official would do. "Commander Wrath," Kane said, extending a hand in what Wrath recognized as the human greeting gesture. "Thank you for your cooperation. This is Colonel Mason, commander of the 7th Marine Expeditionary Unit. His forces will be establishing a defensive perimeter around New Zealand immediately." Wrath clasped the human's hand briefly, noting the firmness of her grip. "Admiral, while we appreciate your assistance, I must ask, why has Earth intervened? The Council, Kane interrupted, has failed in its primary duty to protect its member species. We monitored your distress calls. We analyzed the Vex threat, and we decided to act while the Council was still forming committees to discuss the appropriate response." Colonel Mason stepped forward, his helmet retracted, revealing a weathered human face with a scar running from temple to jaw. "Commander, I need your city's defensive layouts, whatever you have on the Vex ground forces positions, and coordination with your local military or police units. My Marines will handle the rest." "Colonel," Wrath began, "you should understand that the Vex aren't like any enemy you've faced. They adapt rapidly, they learn from each engagement, and they vastly outnumber us." Mason's expression didn't change. "With all due respect, Commander, we know exactly what we're facing. The Vex are a hive-mind organism with distributed intelligence networks. They communicate through quantum entanglement. They adapt through rapid evolutionary processes, and they've never faced humanity in combat." He smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "We tend to be unpredictable." Before Wrath could respond, a young Zephyrian official hurried up to them, her crest flattened in distress. "Commander, the Vex have breached the outer agricultural zone. They're advancing on residential Sector 7. Wrath felt his heart sink. Sector 7 housed nearly 100,000 civilians, mostly families that had been evacuated from outlying colonies. If the Vex reached them— "Coordinates," Mason said simply, his helmet snapping back into place. He touched a control on his wrist, and Wrath heard his amplified voice addressing his troops. "Charlie Company, forward deploy to Sector 7. Hammer Protocol authorized." The effect was immediate. Nearly 100 armored humans broke from their formations, boarding smaller, faster transport vehicles that had emerged from the larger dropships. The vehicles, Wolverine tactical transports, according to the designation Wrath glimpsed, roared to life and sped toward the threatened sector. "Admiral," Wrath said, turning to Kane, "I should join my defense forces at the front. My people need to see their commander." Kane nodded. "I understand. Colonel Mason will coordinate the defense. I'll return to the fleet to oversee the orbital battle and prepare evacuation ships. She paused, fixing Wrath with an intense gaze. Commander, I want to be clear. We're not just here to evacuate your people. We're here to eliminate the Vex, completely. As Kane departed for her shuttle, Wrath fell in beside Colonel Mason in one of the Wolverines. The vehicle moved with surprising speed through the streets of New Zealand, its gravitic propulsion system allowing it to navigate around obstacles and civilian crowds with ease. Your people seem afraid of us, Mason observed, watching as Zephyrians scattered from their path, many looking at the human vehicles with expressions of terror. You're an unknown, Wrath replied diplomatically, and your martial appearance is something we're not accustomed to. Mason grunted. Better they fear us than the alternative. They reached the perimeter of Sector 7 in minutes. The scene that greeted them was one of chaos. The few Zephyrian defense forces, mostly police officers with riot shields and stun weapons, were falling back in disarray. Beyond them, a seething mass of black-red tentacles and twisted, chitinous forms surged forward. The Vex ground forces were a nightmare of biological engineering, some like massive insects, others resembling nothing Wrath had ever seen before. All shared the same black-red coloration and moved with a hive mind's perfect coordination. Impressive, Mason said, his voice emotionless through his helmet speakers. But predictable. The Wolverine skidded to a halt, and Mason leapt out, Wrath following close behind. The human colonel surveyed the battlefield for all of 3 seconds before issuing orders. Heavy weapons, forward line. I want javelin teams at 20-meter intervals. Riflemen, suppressing fire. Standard pattern alpha. Medics, prepare for casualties. The human soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, taking positions along the avenue leading into Sector 7. The larger weapons, javelins, apparently, were shoulder-mounted launchers that required 2 soldiers to operate effectively. You might want to cover your ears, Commander, Mason advised, his own helmet sealing completely. Wrath barely had time to react before the first javelins fired. The weapons released not projectiles, but concentrated beams of energy that burned through the front rank of Vex creatures like they were made of paper. The creatures shrieked, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, as their front line disintegrated. The riflemen opened fire next, their weapons emitting 3-round bursts of what appeared to be standard projectiles. But when they struck the Vex, the rounds exploded into bright blue flames that continued to burn despite the Vex's attempts to extinguish them. Phosphex rounds, Mason explained, noticing Wrath's expression. Burns at over 3,000 degrees. Consumes oxygen and continues burning until there's nothing left to burn. The Vex can't adapt to it because there's nothing to adapt to. It's just heat and chemistry. The Vex assault faltered under the human counterattack. Where the creatures had advanced in an organized wave before, now they scattered, trying different approaches. Some burrowed into the ground, others climbed buildings, seeking to flank the human position. Mason observed this with what seemed like satisfaction. They're learning. Good. He touched his wrist control again. Orbital fire support. Grid coordinates follow. Danger close. Wrath had just enough time to process what danger close might mean before the sky opened up. Beams of energy, far more powerful than the javelins, lanced down from the Terran ships in orbit, striking with pinpoint accuracy at the Vex positions Mason had designated. Buildings that had been infested with Vex bioforms simply disappeared, vaporized in an instant. The ground where Vex had burrowed erupted in geysers of molten rock and steam. For 5 minutes, the orbital bombardment continued. When it finally ceased, the Vex advance had been completely halted. More than that, it had been pushed back nearly a kilometer, with nothing but scorched earth and cooling glass where the creatures had been. Advance and secure, Mason ordered his troops. Full sweep, no survivors. As the human soldiers moved forward, Wrath found his voice. Colonel, that was the most devastating display of military force I've ever witnessed. Mason turned to him, his helmet retracting again to reveal a grim expression. That was just a skirmish, Commander. A probing action, The real battle hasn't even begun. Over the next 24 hours, Wrath witnessed the full extent of humanity's approach to warfare. The Terran forces established a defensive perimeter around New Zealand that extended 5 kilometers in every direction. Within that perimeter, they systematically cleared every structure, every tunnel, every possible hiding place of Vex presence. Their methods were thorough and ruthless. Admiral Kane, meanwhile, coordinated the space battle from her flagship. The Vex orbital structures were systematically destroyed, one after another, using the same combined arms approach Wrath had witnessed in the first engagement: nuclear weapons to break the outer shell, particle beams to penetrate the core, precision strikes to eliminate remaining fragments. By the end of the first day, the Terrans had established complete orbital superiority. The few remaining Vex structures were being hunted down by Valkyrie interceptors, while the larger Terran vessels took up defensive positions around the planet. Wrath met with Kane and Mason in what had become their joint command center, a repurposed administrative building in New Zealand's government district. The large central chamber was now dominated by a holographic display of the entire Kepler 442b system, with real-time updates on Terran and Vex positions. The evacuation ships will begin arriving tomorrow, Kane announced without preamble. We can move approximately 200,000 civilians per day. Priority will be given to children, the elderly, and the injured. Where will they go? Wrath asked. The Council hasn't authorized. They'll go to Proxima Centauri b. Kane interrupted. We have established extensive habitation facilities there. It's not ideal for your physiology long-term, but it will serve until we can establish a more permanent solution or until Kepler 442b is habitable again. Wrath blinked in surprise. You would accept 2 million refugees onto a human world. Kane's expression softened slightly. Commander, when we received your distress call, our response was unanimous. Earth has known its share of disasters, wars, and near-extinction events. We understand what it means to face annihilation. Your people will be treated with dignity and respect, and provided with the means to defend themselves in the future. Mason added, No offense, Commander, but your species' approach to defense is inadequate. Before Wrath could respond to this blunt assessment, Mayor Lux of New Zealand entered the command center. The elderly Zepyrian's normally vibrant orange crest had faded to a dull yellow, but his eyes were clear and determined. Commander Wrath, he greeted, then turned to the humans. Admiral Kane, Colonel Mason, I've come to express the gratitude of New Zealand's citizens. Your intervention has given us hope where there was none. Kane nodded acknowledgement. Mayor Lux, I understand your people have concerns about our methods. Colonel Mason reports that many civilians seem distressed by our weapons and tactics. Lux sighed, his crest rippling slightly. Admiral, you must understand. The Zepyrian people have not witnessed true warfare in generations. Our conflicts have been limited. Our weapons designed to incapacitate rather than destroy. Your approach is alien to us. But effective, Mason pointed out. Yes, Lux admitted, undeniably effective. The holographic display flickered, drawing everyone's attention. A large mass of Vex bioforms was moving across the planet's surface, converging on what had been identified as their primary hive structure, a massive, fortress-like growth that dominated the southern continent. They're consolidating, Mason observed, pulling their forces back to the primary node. Classic defensive posture. Kane studied the display with narrowed eyes. Or they're preparing for a counterattack. The Vex are nothing if not adaptable. What do you propose, Admiral? Wrath asked. Kane was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the display. Then she straightened. Decision made. We end this. Now. She tapped a control, opening a channel to her fleet. This is Admiral Kane. Prepare the hammer of Sol for primary weapon deployment. Target, Vex Central Node, Southern Continent. Authorization, Kane Alpha 77. A hush fell over the command center. Even Mason seemed surprised by the order. Admiral, he said carefully, The plasma lance hasn't been field tested at that range or against a biological target of that size. Then this will be its test, Kane replied firmly. The longer we allow the Vex to regroup, the more they learn about our tactics. We end this decisively. Wrath looked between the two humans, sensing an undercurrent he didn't fully understand. What is this plasma lance? Mason's expression was grim. Our newest weapon system, theoretical until 6 months ago, well, you'll see. The holographic display zoomed out, showing the massive Terran flagship, the Hammer of Sol, moving into position above the southern continent. The vessel was truly enormous, dwarfing everything else in the Terran fleet. As Wrath watched, sections of the ship began to reconfigure, panels sliding away to reveal a massive aperture that ran nearly the entire length of the vessel. Energy buildup detected, reported a Terran officer from a console nearby. Lance at 30% capacity, 50, 70. The air in the command center seemed to thicken with tension. Wrath found himself holding his breath, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Lance at full capacity, the officer announced. Target locked. Firing solution confirmed. Kane's voice was steady. Fire! On the display, a blinding white beam erupted from the Hammer of Sol, so intense that the holographic systems automatically dimmed to protect the viewer's eyes. The beam struck the Vex fortress with pinpoint accuracy. What happened next defied Wrath's understanding of physics. The Vex structure didn't explode or burn or melt. It simply ceased to exist. One moment, it was there. A massive biological fortress covering hundreds of square kilometers. The next, there was nothing but a perfectly circular crater, the edges glowing white-hot. The silence in the command center was absolute. Target eliminated. The Terran officer finally reported, his voice barely above a whisper. No residual Vex signatures detected within the impact zone. Mason let out a low whistle. Well, I'd say that qualifies as a successful field test. Mayor Lux stumbled backward, finding a chair to sink into. By the ancestors, he murmured. What? What have you done? Kane's expression remained impassive. We've removed the Vex central node from existence, Mayor. The weapon uses superheated plasma contained within a quantum field to essentially unmake matter. The energy released is then channeled back into the quantum field, creating a self-sustaining reaction that continues until the target is completely consumed. Wrath struggled to comprehend the scale of the weapon he had just witnessed. Admiral, such a weapon, the Galactic Council would never. The Galactic Council, Kane interrupted, has spent the last century pretending that threats like the Vex don't exist. They've deliberately hampered their own defensive capabilities in the name of peace. Meanwhile, humanity has prepared. We've built weapons that can face any threat, developed tactics that can counter any enemy. Her eyes met Wrath's. We remembered what so many species chose to forget, that the universe is not inherently safe or kind. The holographic display was now showing real-time updates from across the planet. The effect of destroying the central node was immediate and dramatic. Vex ground forces had frozen in place. Their coordinated movements ceased. Some began to move erratically, attacking each other or simply wandering aimlessly. Others collapsed entirely, the black-red coloration fading to a dull gray as the life left them. Just as we predicted, Mason said with satisfaction. Destroy the central node and the hive mind fragments. The quantum entanglement breaks down without the primary coordinator. Kane nodded. Begin the mop-up operation. I want every remaining Vex organism on this planet and in this system eliminated within the next 72 hours. No exceptions, no survivors. As the humans mobilized for this final phase of their operation, Wrath found himself standing beside Mayor Lux, both of them watching in silence as the Terran war machine shifted into its next gear. They saved us, Lux said quietly. But at what cost, I wonder? Wrath had no answer. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. True to Admiral Kane's word, the Terran evacuation ships began arriving the day after the destruction of the Vex central node. These vessels were different from the warships. larger, designed specifically for mass civilian transport, with medical facilities and accommodations suitable for Ziperian physiology. Colonel Mason's ground forces, meanwhile, systematically eliminated every remaining trace of Vex presence on Kepler 442b. They moved outward from New Zelity in an ever-expanding circle, using a combination of ground troops, aerial support, and precision orbital strikes to eradicate the now disorganized Vex organisms. They were thorough to the point of obsession, scanning and rescanning cleared areas to ensure not even a microscopic trace of Vex bioform remained. Rath spent most of his time coordinating with both the Terran forces and his own people, trying to manage the massive logistical challenge of evacuating over 1 million civilians while simultaneously dealing with the psychological impact of the Terran intervention. Many Ziperians were grateful for the humans' arrival, but many others were deeply disturbed by their methods and weapons. On the 4th day after the humans' arrival, Rath received a summons to meet with Admiral Kane aboard her flagship. A small shuttle transported him to the Hammer of Sol, giving him his first close look at the massive vessel. Up close, the ship was even more impressive and intimidating, a monument to humanity's martial prowess, with every line and curve designed for war. Kane met him in what she called the observation deck, a large chamber with transparent walls that offered a panoramic view of Kepler 442b below and the surrounding space. The Admiral stood with her hands clasped behind her back, gazing down at the planet. "Beautiful world," she commented as Rath approached. "Even with the damage the Vex caused, the underlying biosphere seems resilient. Our environmental scientists believe it can recover fully within a decade." Rath joined her at the viewport. From this height, the scars of the Vex invasion were clearly visible. Large swathes of the planet's surface blackened or altered, interspersed with the circular impact sites of Terran orbital strikes. "I wanted to inform you personally," Kane continued, "that the operation is complete. Our forces have eliminated all Vex presence in the Kepler 442b system. The final outlying node was destroyed 3 hours ago." Rath felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a weight he had carried since the Vex first appeared. "Then it's over." "This battle is," Kane agreed. "But the war may be just beginning. We're sending scout ships to the coordinates where the initial Vex breach occurred. We need to understand how they traveled here and from where. And if you find their point of origin?" Kane's expression hardened. "Then we'll do what humanity has always done when faced with an existential threat. We'll eliminate it at its source." Rath studied the human admiral. In just a few days, he had seen humanity display technological prowess that rivaled or exceeded anything in the Galactic Council, combined with a willingness to use that power that was simultaneously terrifying and awe-inspiring. "Admiral," he said carefully, "my people owe yours a debt we can never repay. You saved not just lives, but our entire civilization. Yet I must ask, why? Why would Earth expend such resources, risk such valuable ships and soldiers, for a species you've never even met?" Kane was silent for a long moment, her gaze still fixed on the planet below. "There's a concept in human history," she finally said. "It comes from one of our ancient languages, Latin. The concept is Pax Romana, Roman peace. It referred to a period when one power was so dominant, so unassailable, that peace prevailed because no one dared to challenge it." She turned to face Rath. "For the past century, while the Galactic Council has preached disarmament and cooperation, humanity has been building, preparing, not because we want war, Commander, but because we understand that true peace comes only from strength." "And now?" Rath asked. "What happens now?" "Now," Kane said, "the galaxy learns that there's a new power at the table, one that won't stand by while threats like the Vex consume innocent worlds. One that understands that sometimes the most humanitarian action is decisive military force." As if to punctuate her words, a series of Terran vessels passed beneath them, not warships this time, but ships clearly designed for construction and terraforming. Massive, industrial behemoths that would begin the process of rebuilding what the Vex had destroyed. "The evacuation will be complete within 2 weeks." Kane continued. Simultaneously, our engineering corps will begin reconstruction of critical infrastructure. We estimate that the first Ziperian civilians can return to select areas of Kepler 442b within 6 months. Wrath was stunned. You would commit to rebuilding our world as well? Of course, Kane replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That's what it means to render aid, Commander. We don't just eliminate the threat, we help rebuild what was lost. She paused. Though I should note that any reconstructed settlements will include defensive systems designed to our specifications. We won't leave your people vulnerable again. The implication was clear. Earth's help came with strings attached. Ziperian society would be forever changed by this intervention. Their pacifistic culture would be altered, militarized to some degree. Their world would now host Terran weapons systems, possibly even a permanent Terran presence. And yet, the alternative had been extinction. The Galactic Council won't approve. Wrath noted, they'll see this as Earth forcing its way onto the galactic stage, imposing its military might on a vulnerable species. Kane actually smiled at this. The Council is welcome to register its disapproval from the comfort of its chambers, light years away from any actual danger. Meanwhile, we'll be here, doing what needs to be done. Her smile faded. But make no mistake, Commander, this isn't about politics or power. This is about survival. Humanity nearly destroyed itself multiple times before we learned that lesson. We won't stand by and watch another species fall because they haven't learned it yet. A Terran officer approached, handing Kane a data tablet. She reviewed it quickly, then handed it back with a nod. Our long-range sensors have detected multiple Vex signatures in neighboring systems, she informed Wrath. Small scouting parties, most likely. Fragments that were separated from the main hive when we destroyed the central node. Battle Group Themis is already moving to intercept. Wrath felt a chill at the casual way she described dispatching warships to other star systems, systems that might well fall under Galactic Council jurisdiction. Admiral, he began, those systems are in danger. Kane finished for him. And we will eliminate that danger, regardless of political boundaries. The Vex don't respect borders. Commander, neither can we if we intend to stop them. As Wrath was shuttled back to the planet's surface, he found his mind swimming with contradictory emotions. Relief at his people's salvation warred with unease at the methods used to achieve it. Gratitude toward the humans clashed with fear of what their intervention might mean for the future of galactic politics. By the time he returned to New Zealand, he found the city transformed. Terran Engineering Corps had already begun setting up prefabricated structures to replace damaged buildings. Human medical teams worked alongside Ziperian doctors, treating the injured and traumatized. Supply ships delivered food, medicine, and clean water. In the central plaza, Wrath found Colonel Mason overseeing the distribution of aid packages. The human officer had removed his powered armor for the first time since his arrival, revealing a tall, muscular frame clad in a simple uniform. He was demonstrating to a group of Ziperian children how to open and use the emergency ration kits the humans had brought. Colonel, Wrath greeted him. This is not what I expected. Mason straightened, nodding to Wrath. Humanitarian aid includes more than just military intervention. Commander, my Marines are trained for this phase of operations as thoroughly as they are for combat. One of the Ziperian children, a young female with a bright purple crest, looked up at Mason with wide eyes. Are you really from Earth? She asked in halting galactic standard. Mason knelt down to her level, his normally stern expression softening. I am. I was born in a place called Montana. It has mountains even taller than the ones near your city. The child considered this, then asked, Why do you have so many weapons? My parents say weapons are bad. Mason glanced at Wrath, then back to the child. Sometimes, little one, good people need weapons to protect other good people from bad things. Like the Vex, we don't use our weapons because we want to. We use them because we have to. The explanation seemed to satisfy the child, who nodded solemnly before returning to examining the ration kit. Mason stood, his expression thoughtful. They'll need to understand that concept if they're going to survive in this galaxy. He said quietly to Wrath. The universe isn't the peaceful place your culture has pretended it is. And is it as dangerous as your culture believes? Wrath countered. Mason's eyes hardened slightly. The Vex weren't the first hostile species we've encountered, Commander. Just the first we've engaged beyond our own borders. He gestured toward the plaza, where humans and Zepyrians worked together. This, helping others, protecting the innocent, this is what humanity has always been capable of. But we learned the hard way that compassion without strength is just victimhood waiting to happen. Before Wrath could respond, his communication device chimed. It was Nyx, her voice urgent. Commander, you need to return to the command center immediately. We've received a transmission from the Galactic Council. The Council's message was delivered by Counselor Jen, the Arcturian representative who had always been one of the more sympathetic voices regarding the Zepyrian situation. Her holographic image flickered slightly as she addressed Wrath, Kane, and Mayor Lux. The Council has received reports of unauthorized Terran military operations in Zepyrian space. She began, her tone formal but her expression concerned. We must express our strongest condemnation of Earth's unilateral action in violation of galactic non-intervention protocols. Admiral Kane stepped forward, her posture rigid. Counselor, with all due respect, while the Council deliberated, a member species faced extinction. We acted. The results speak for themselves. Jen's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Admiral Kane, the Council recognizes that the immediate threat to Kepler 442b has been addressed. However, the methods employed, particularly the use of banned weapons systems and the deployment of the device you call the Plasma Lance, represent a clear violation of the Treaty of Proxima, which prohibits weapons of mass destruction in Council space. The Treaty of Proxima, Kane replied evenly, is an agreement among Council members. Earth is not a signatory. Nevertheless, Jen continued, the Council demands the immediate withdrawal of all Terran military forces from Zepyrian space and an end to all unauthorized operations in neighboring systems. Here, Wrath felt compelled to interject. Counselor Jen, with respect, the Terran forces are currently engaged in evacuating our civilians and beginning reconstruction efforts. Their withdrawal at this time would be problematic. Jen's expression softened slightly. Commander Wrath, the Council understands your position. We are dispatching humanitarian vessels to assist with evacuation and reconstruction. They will arrive within 5 standard days. 5 days, Kane repeated, her tone making it clear what she thought of this timeline. Counselor, the Vex would have consumed this entire planet in 5 days if we hadn't intervened. The threat has been neutralized, Admiral. Jen pointed out, the urgency is no longer the same. Except, Mason interrupted, stepping into view of the holographic projector. Our sensors have detected Vex scout parties in multiple neighboring systems. If they establish new central nodes, the Council will address any further Vex incursions through established protocols. Jen said firmly. Kane's laugh was short and without humor. The same protocols that left the Zepyrians to die. No, Counselor. Humanity has entered this fight, and we will see it through to the end. The Vex will be eliminated, at their source, if necessary. Jen's holographic image flickered as she leaned forward. Admiral, I must warn you, any attempt by Earth to expand this conflict or to establish a military presence in Council space will be met with the full diplomatic and economic power of the Galactic Council. Noted, Kane replied simply. Is there anything else? The exchange continued for several more minutes, but it was clear that neither side would budge. When Jen's hologram finally disappeared, a heavy silence fell over the command center. Well, Mayor Lux said finally, it seems we find ourselves caught between 2 great powers. Kane turned to him, her expression serious. No, Mayor. You find yourselves aligned with the power that actually showed up when you needed help. The question now is whether your people and your government will remember that when the Council arrives with their too late aid packages and their diplomatic pressure. The question hung in the air, unanswered. The following week saw a rapid transformation of Kepler 442b and, in many ways, of Zephyrian society itself. True to Admiral Kane's word, the Terran forces divided their efforts between military operations, hunting down the last vestiges of Vex presence in neighboring systems, and humanitarian assistance. The evacuation proceeded efficiently, with the most vulnerable Zephyrians transported to human settlements in the Proxima Centauri system, while others remained to begin the rebuilding process. The Galactic Council vessels arrived exactly when promised. 5 days after their communication, they brought additional supplies, medical personnel, and infrastructure specialists. But they also brought diplomatic envoys, who immediately began working to counter Terran influence among the Zephyrian leadership. Wrath found himself in an increasingly complex political situation. As the military commander who had overseen the defense of his people, however unsuccessful that defense had been before the humans arrived, he now wielded significant influence. Many Zephyrians looked to him for guidance on how to navigate the new reality their species faced. A month after the Terran intervention, Wrath stood on a newly constructed observation platform overlooking what had once been the Meridian colony, where the Vex had left a writhing mass of black-red bioform. Terran and Zephyrian engineers now worked together to reclaim the land. Massive machines, some Terran, some Zephyrian, some a hybrid of the two technologies, processed the soil, eliminating any remaining Vex contamination and preparing the ground for new construction. Admiral Kane joined him on the platform, her uniform crisp despite the dust and activity below. "Impressive progress," she commented. "Your engineers learn quickly." "Necessity is a powerful teacher," Wrath replied. "As is fear." Kane glanced at him. "You disapprove of how we've changed your people." It wasn't a question, but Wrath answered anyway. "I'm conflicted. You saved us. No one can deny that. But in saving us, you fundamentally altered who we are. The first Zephyrian weapons manufacturing facility began production yesterday. We're adapting your defensive shield technology for our settlements. Our children now play games where they pretend to be Terran Marines fighting the Vex." "Would you prefer the alternative?" Kane asked quietly. "A peaceful extinction?" "Of course not," Wrath said. "But I wonder if there wasn't a middle path, a way to defend ourselves without becoming, well, like you." Kane was silent for a long moment, watching the reconstruction below. "Humanity wasn't always as you see us now," she finally said. "We spent millennia fighting amongst ourselves, developing increasingly destructive weapons to use against our own kind. We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times, through war, through environmental catastrophe, through sheer stubborn refusal to cooperate." She turned to face him fully. "What you see now, our unity, our purpose, our technological prowess, these things came at a terrible cost. We learned the hard way that strength is necessary for survival. But we also learned that strength without compassion, without a moral core, is just another form of destruction. And is that what you're offering my people? Strength tempered with compassion?" "We're offering you a chance," Kane said. "A chance to learn from our mistakes instead of repeating them, to build a society that can defend itself without losing its soul in the process." She gestured toward the horizon, where a Terran defensive installation was being constructed. "Those weapons, those shields, their tools, Commander, nothing more. How your people use them. What values guide their use, that's still yours to decide." Before Wrath could respond, his communication device chimed. It was Dex, excitement evident in his voice even through the small speaker. "Commander, the Hammer of Sol has returned from the expedition to the Vex breach point. They found something big." Kane was already moving toward her shuttle before Wrath could relay the message. "We need to get back to newsiality," she said over her shoulder. "If they found what I think they have..." The command center was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Colonel Mason was already there, conferring with his officers over a holographic display that showed what appeared to be a massive structure floating in deep space. "Report," Kane demanded as she strode into the room. Mason straightened. The hammer located the source of the spatial anomaly that allowed the Vex to enter this system. It's not natural. Admiral, it's a constructed gateway, and it's still active. The holographic display zoomed in on the structure. It was unlike anything Wrath had seen before. Not Vex in design, but something else entirely. A massive ring of unknown material, kilometers in diameter, with complex technological components embedded throughout its structure. Is it Vex technology? Wrath asked. Mason shook his head. Negative. The architecture is completely different, more advanced. If anything, the Hammer's science team believes this gateway was constructed by another species entirely, one technologically superior to the Vex. And the Vex found it and used it. Kane concluded, or were permitted to use it. The implication hung in the air. If there was a species out there with technology capable of creating interstellar gateways, and if that species had some relationship with the Vex, we've detected similar energy signatures in 6 other locations within scanning range. Mason continued. All dormant at present, but with the same fundamental architecture. This isn't an isolated phenomenon. Admiral, it's a network. Kane's expression had gone completely still, her eyes fixed on the holographic gateway. Analysis of the active gateway? Where does it lead? A Terran science officer stepped forward. Based on quantum resonance patterns, Admiral, the gateway connects to a star system approximately 12,000 light-years from here, outside of known galactic council space. The Vex homeworld, Wrath suggested. Perhaps, Kane said. Or perhaps something worse. She straightened. Decision made. Prepare a probe. Full sensor package, encrypted quantum communication relay. I want to know what's on the other side of that gateway before we commit to any action. As the Terrans moved to carry out her orders, Wrath pulled Kane aside. Admiral, if you're considering sending ships through that gateway, I'm considering all options. Commander. Kane interrupted, including the possibility that we've stumbled onto something much bigger than a single Vex incursion. The Council should be informed, Wrath insisted. If there's a threat of this magnitude, the Council will be informed, Kane assured him, but not until we have more data. I won't have them charging in with inadequate information and insufficient force, potentially triggering a larger conflict. Mayor Lux entered the command center, accompanied by several Zepyrian officials and, to Wrath's surprise, Councillor Zhen herself. The Arcturian diplomat's expression was grave as she took in the scene. Admiral Kane, she greeted formally. I understand your vessels have made a significant discovery. Kane's eyes narrowed slightly. News travels fast, Councillor. The Council has monitoring stations throughout this sector, Jen replied. They detected the unusual energy signature when your ship activated the gateway for scanning purposes. For a moment, tension crackled between the two figures, the Terran military commander and the Galactic Council diplomat, representatives of fundamentally different approaches to galactic security. It was Mayor Lux who broke the impasse. Perhaps, he suggested mildly, this situation calls for cooperation rather than competition. If this gateway network presents a threat to both Council space and Earth's interests. Jen considered this, then nodded slowly. The Council would be willing to establish a joint research and security initiative to investigate this gateway network, with appropriate oversight and shared authority. Shared authority. Kane repeated, her tone making it clear what she thought of the concept. But after a moment, she too nodded. A joint initiative could be arranged, on certain conditions. As the two began to negotiate the terms of this unprecedented cooperation, Wrath found himself drawn to the holographic image of the gateway. Something about it filled him with both wonder and dread, a sense that the galaxy had suddenly become much larger and much more dangerous than anyone had realized. Dex joined him, his crest flickering with nervous energy. Everything's changing, isn't it, Commander? Nothing will be the same after this. Wrath couldn't disagree. In the span of a few short months, his people had faced extinction, been saved by a civilization they barely knew existed, and now stood at the threshold of what might be a new era in galactic history. Change isn't always bad, he said finally. The Zephyrians of a year ago couldn't have survived the Vex. Perhaps the Zephyrians of tomorrow will be better equipped for whatever comes through that gateway. Dex's expression was skeptical. By becoming more like the humans, militarized, aggressive? No, Wrath said firmly. By taking what we need from their example without losing who we are. The humans didn't save us just so we could become them. Dex, they saved us so we could continue to be us, but a version of us that can survive in a dangerous universe. As if to punctuate his words, a group of Zephyrian children ran past the entrance to the command center, laughing as they played. One child carried a toy version of a Terran Marine's rifle, while another had painted her face with red markings similar to those on the human ships. But they were still Zephyrian children, their crests bright with joy and life, their games still fundamentally about connection and community rather than conquest. Admiral Kane noticed them too, a small smile breaking through her usually stern expression. That, she said quietly to no one in particular, is why we came. 6 months after the Terran intervention, Kepler 442b was a world transformed. The scars of the Vex invasion were still visible, but they were increasingly overlaid with new growth, new construction, new life. The Joint Terran-Zephyrian Council Initiative had established a research base near the gateway, with ships from all three powers maintaining a vigilant watch over the mysterious portal. Wrath stood on the balcony of the newly rebuilt Zephyrian Starguard headquarters in New Zealand, watching as a mixed fleet of vessels performed coordinated maneuvers in the sky above. Zephyrian ships, now equipped with modified Terran defensive systems, flew alongside Terran destroyers and Council peacekeeping vessels in a display that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Admiral Kane joined him, now wearing the formal dress uniform of the Terran Unified Defense Fleet. Impressive progress, she commented, echoing her words from months earlier. We had good teachers, Wrath replied. Kane smiled slightly. And willing students. She handed him a data tablet. The latest report from the Gateway research team. The probe successfully transmitted back for 36 hours before going silent. The data it gathered is concerning. Wrath reviewed the information, his crest flattening against his skull as he absorbed the implications. The Vex are just foot soldiers, he said finally. Biological weapons deployed by something else entirely. So it would seem. Kane agreed. The question now is whether that something else knows we've discovered their gateway network, and what they'll do about it if they do. Wrath looked up at the fleet exercises overhead, seeing them in a new light. Not a ceremonial display, but preparation. Not a celebration of victory, but a readiness for a potentially larger conflict to come. Will we be ready? He asked. Kane followed his gaze upward, her expression resolute. Humanity has spent its entire history preparing for moments like this, Commander. And now, so has your species. She turned to face him fully. The real question is whether the galaxy as a whole will be ready to stand together when the time comes. Wrath thought of the Galactic Council, of their centuries of peace and prosperity, of their reluctance to embrace military power even in the face of existential threats. He thought of Earth, isolated but formidable, developing weapons of terrifying power while simultaneously nurturing a fierce protective instinct toward other species. And he thought of his own people, the Zephyrians, who had nearly been consumed by their pacifism but were now finding a new path, one that preserved their fundamental values while acknowledging the realities of a dangerous universe. I believe we will be, he said finally. Not because we've become warriors, but because we've remembered what's worth fighting for. As the sun set over New Zealand, casting long shadows across the rebuilt city, Wrath reflected on the strange journey that had brought his people to this moment. They had faced extinction and emerged transformed, not broken, not diminished, but evolved. They had discovered that survival sometimes required strength, but that strength did not have to come at the cost of compassion. The Vex had nearly destroyed them. The humans had saved them. But in the end, It would be the Zephyrians themselves who would determine what kind of species they would become in this new and dangerous galaxy. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that might one day bring new threats, new challenges, new discoveries, Wrath found himself against all odds, looking forward to that future with something that felt very much like hope